Hello, world. I'm Chalers Altendorf. This is the Know Your Place podcast, episode 19. On this week's episode, I talk about some of my favorite memories of restaurants past and their connections to the neighborhoods they were in. A special dedication to Anthony Bourdain. Stay tuned. So a couple weeks ago, I'm sure everyone's aware, one of my favorite people passed away. Well, it's one of the favorite people that I watched a lot. And his name was Anthony Bourdain. And a lot of people knew who he was. And one of the glorious things that Anthony Bourdain did was that he really used the culinary experience as a medium to bring cultures together. His show No Reservations was very popular in America, and it really exposed us to a lot of culinary exploits. And it's very popular worldwide. I was very stunned to see how many fans of him there were internationally when I sort of posted about him in an international geography group I belong to on Facebook. Anyway, so in honor of him, I thought I'd do a little talk today about some of my favorite restaurants and, well, some of my favorite restaurants that no longer exist and that I consider to be a very strong part of the identity of the communities that they were in. So anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first restaurant I wanted to talk about was a restaurant that was in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin. That is about a 10-mile drive west of Sheboygan, and they claim there's falls in the river there, although they're not really very tall falls. And I would go there because it was somewhere sort of, it's weird. Okay, so in Wisconsin, and I reposted this on the Know Your Place SoundCloud website, one of my other favorite shows called The Splendid Table did a little recording about this. But basically there's these things called supper clubs, and I don't know how to describe them. They're not fancy restaurants per se. You don't necessarily have to have a suit and tie to go in there, but they were the best restaurant in town. They were where you would go to look nice and be seen and have other people see you. And they had full course meals. You know, they start out with an appetizer. They have soups and salads, and then they have your full dinner and dessert, and they always have a bar too. I mean, this is a full service restaurant in every sense of the word. And there's famous ones all around the country, like there's the Beverly Hills Supper Club that burned down in northern Kentucky, and there's lots of other ones I hear out in California now. But, you know, every community in Wisconsin had one of these when I was a kid still, and most of them were from the 50s or sometime originally. In fact, one of my parents' friends still owns a restaurant that's more of a seafood place, but is still kind of like this in their hometown. It's called Newport Shores, and it's in Port Washington, Wisconsin, so look that up. But I'm going to talk about one that's no longer there. So when I was a kid, my grandmother lived in Ozaukee County, and my grandfather lived in Sheboygan County. And they have been not together for a long time, so we would always see both of them. But, you know, we would go out to dinner sometimes, and sort of all these people who had grown up in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, there's multiple of these kind of restaurants there, but it seemed like they all liked this place called the Villager. That it was like this nice place. And it was right in the middle of the downtown of Sheboygan Falls. In fact, I remember sometimes it was kind of annoying to get a parking spot because you'd have to wind around and figure out where you could parallel park on the side of the street to get to, because I don't think they had a lot behind them, you know. But it really wasn't that hard to find somewhere to park because Sheboygan Falls isn't very big of a town. It's only got, I think, like 8,000 people or so. So anyway, you'd have to like make a couple turns to find a parking spot, and then you'd walk in there, and it was really crazy. You'd come in, and it was actually two storefronts in this old strip of the downtown there, and you'd go in the bar entrance. And I, as a kid, I remember just being totally enamored with this little bar they had there because they had a couple of old arcade games from the 80s, and my dad loved arcade games when he was a kid in the 80s. Well, I guess young adult in the 80s. And they also had this so funny. So you go through the bar and you'd see these couple old arcade games. There usually be a bunch of people sitting at the bar drinking, of course, or they had up all the Packers stuff. You know, it was always a big deal when the Packers game was on because it is Wisconsin after all. And then you would walk over, and the bar was made. The actual bar was made out of this really old, strong wood. You know, not some kind of new modern stuff with that granite or it. And actually, I believe the whole, except for the area right under the bar, I think it was carpeted with this really old blue thick carpet, and you'd walk through, and it's just, I'm laughing describing this now because there's not modern restaurants like this anymore. At least not that I know. Most new restaurants open up in America now. They all want the sort of industrial look, right? And this was nothing like that. This is completely a throwback. So anyway, you go up and then you'd go through the bar and you'd come up and they'd have a little stand where the hostess station was, and that the other storefront was the main dining room. And I remember on that stand, they'd always have free mints, and they had this toothpick dispenser. And as a kid, I just thought this was the coolest thing ever because you'd push down on this little plastic knob, and it would push out a toothpick and had a little glass window where you'd see all the toothpicks. And every restaurant in Wisconsin used to give out free toothpicks. I don't know if they still do. Some of the older ones still do, but newer restaurants, don't generally give out toothpicks anymore. I think even for a while, dentists started to say that was bad for your teeth. I don't remember, but I loved the toothpick thing. It was just so cool to me. My parents were probably super annoyed with me always trying to play with it. I don't remember. Anyway, so you come in, and then you get in there, and they had some tables in the middle, but along the walls, they had these really old wooden booths, and they were like not any kind of uniform size. They were just kind of like, they felt kind of boxy and tall, but they also had coat hangers on the end of them because it's Wisconsin and it's cold. So you'd come up and you'd hang up your coat when you sat down right next to you there instead of having to hang it up somewhere else, And you just come and sit in the booth, and your family'd be there, and they had your typical kind of American fare. I mean, you could get burgers, you could get you could get fish a lot. A lot of people would get fish because even though Sheboygan Falls isn't right on Lake Michigan, it wasn't that far from Lake Michigan, and a lot of people don't know there's a lot of inland lakes in Wisconsin. It actually has more lakes than Minnesota, technically speaking. Kind of depends on what you define as a lake, but they have a lot. 15,000, supposedly. So anyway, you'd come up in here, and you'd come in there and you get your meal, and it would be, like I said, you'd start off with an appetizer, and you'd split it with you and the rest of your family, and then you'd choose the super salad, and that was always a hard choice, because sometimes, they would have a soup you really wanted, but you felt like, maybe I should eat more vegetables. Should I get the salad? And we're talking a full salad here. We're talking like a plate that would, it would just, it would be like about the size of an actual dinner plate that you get now at most places. They charge you $8 for the salad, and this would just be included with the meal. And then, before they would even bring out the salads, they'd also, a lot of these places, and I think the Villager still had this, is they would have a a thing of bread, free bread. Now, some places still have free bread, but a lot of places now charge you for the bread. But they would not only have bread, they would have like a loaf there, or sometimes they'd bring out rolls, and then they'd also have these little pre-packaged breadstick things. I don't know how many people have still heard of those, but it was out of this world. So anyway, then you'd eat there, and finally your main course would come out. I usually got like a burger or something, or I can't remember, it's been so long ago. And I don't really remember the entrees all that much, honestly, because what I always remembered about this restaurant, and some other places do this, but they were the best at this. They would bring out the dessert tray. Okay, so they would come out to your table with a tray with 10 different desserts on it most nights, and you could pick from it. It was really wild. And oh my gosh, as a kid, you'd be I'd be totally full, and I'd still want to pick off that dessert tray, because you just see all these cakes in front of you. And up in Wisconsin, the little old ladies love to make this thing called a Schaumtort, and oh man, I would kill for that too. My mom would always order that. Oh, and I'd split with her, or split with my dad, and yeah. So I have all these memories of that place, and it's such a strong geographic identity too, because it was Sheboygan Falls to me. Like, there's other stuff in the town, like there's this other little grill called the Parkside Grill, and now it actually has like an exit off of one of the highways and has like a McDonald's and some other things out there. And and of course they have the Sheboygan Falls, this little old mill thing. But I don't know, I can't see the town without us going there with my grandma some winters, in the snow, driving over there, and the wind's blowing, it's real cold, and you're like rushing to get up in that storefront because the wind is just howling and it feels like it's negative 20 outside. I'll never forget those days. I'll never forget that restaurant. And unfortunately, I think it was about a decade ago now, the owners sold it and it became a tapas bar. And I'm not quite sure what it is now, but it's not the same, right? It just, that time and place, it's something that's gone. And I'll probably miss it. That was part of my childhood. And I moved away from Wisconsin when I was 8, but we would go up there I'd go up there twice a year, and we'd go up there almost once a year. So I've been there a lot. It very much sticks out in my mind still. Alright, so that's the first restaurant. The second one I want to move on to was a very sad surprise to me, actually, because I ate there not that long ago, and I have only eaten at this place once, but it left such a strong impression upon me that I can't help but talk about it. So it was in this neighborhood in Indianapolis called Fountain Square, it's a pretty hip neighborhood. It's got art galleries, lots of new kinds of things popping up, and it's got this strange, different kind of bowling alley that's not normal bowling, and lots of bars. But there was a restaurant that had been there a long, long time, long before any of the new stuff that attracted people to the area came in. It was just on the main drag, but it looked kind of innocuous in front of a row of houses, and it looked kind of like a house itself. And it was called Santorini Greek Restaurant. And oh my gosh, this place was Greek. You'd step inside, and they had murals all over the sides and over the ceiling of, oceanic Greek kind of, not oceanic, Mediterranean Sea Greek views, and it was just something to behold. It was like you got invited into some old Greek family's kitchen, and I love that. I absolutely love that. To me, the thing that I hate the most, if there's one thing I could pinpoint that I hate the most about modern times, it's that you go into a restaurant now, and I get why they do the industrial look. It's cheaper on overhead, it's cheaper to clean, but gosh, man, if you've been in one of these industrial modern restaurants, you feel like you've been in all of them. They all got that, oh, well, look at how clean and slick we are and modern we are, and I just look at them all and I say, you look just like what Starbucks was trying to look like 10 years ago. Anyway, that's another rant for another day. But so I went in there, and I was there with my parents and my wife, and we went there after we went to a museum. I guess I've been there twice. I think I went back there one other time. And we had this server that was just crazy fun. Just came over, was describing the menu, being real playful, and it just felt like you were hanging out with your Greek buddies having some Greek food. And of course, they had a sampler that is the most complete Greek sampler I've ever seen. There's a lot of Greek restaurants now in America, or a decent amount. In about every decent sized town, you can find at least one Greek restaurant. And this one had everything on the sampler, and it was like $15 or something like that. But it every type of Greek food, and it had one thing I hadn't seen before. It was called spanakopita, and it's this dish with spinach and feta cheese melted and deep fried, and I'm just like, yes, yes, I'll eat that. Anyway, so I love spanakopita, and I love this Greek restaurant, and I loved their food. I just had a great time there. It was an amazing, fun experience. It was just so much fun being there. And then they had one of those dishes that you light on fire, which is always exciting. Everybody, that's always a real crowd pleaser when you light a dish on fire. So anyway, I was about 6 months ago. One of my friends was going up to Indianapolis, and he asked me to suggest restaurants for them to go to. And of course, I suggested that one, and I found out from one of their friends that it's closed now. It's closed now. And I guess what happened is the old people running it just got sick of running it, and their children only do catering. So that's what happened. That's the story there. And I understand some people don't want to take over the business, but again, it's sad. It feels like another thing that I enjoyed just died. I'm a very nostalgic person, in case you haven't figured it out from this podcast so far. So, it really pains me to have sort of things I enjoy just die. It really makes me feel like, I'm just not with the times anymore, that I don't belong in the times, or whatever. So, those were two really great places. Now, the last one I want to finish with was one of my very regular spots when I was in college at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, Kentucky. Now, a lot of people don't know this about the University of Kentucky, but it's actually a very large campus. It's like 2.5 miles from end to end. It's not exactly that all the way across, but it's like that from end to end. So, and the reason why I say this, so it was like a 20-minute walk from my dorm room to my classes, so I wouldn't eat lunch anywhere near my dorm usually. And I found this, the way the campus was laid out is the main classroom building was on the north end of campus, and so was the student center. And just beyond that, it was sort of like one of the main intersections where everything sort of started back in the day. And if you went down from that up the road a couple blocks, there was the old hospital, the Good Samaritan Hospital. I don't think it's a hospital anymore. But anyway, sort of halfway between the main campus and this hospital on this street called Limestone Street, which was the main road that ran into downtown from the south, you could go, there was this restaurant, and it was called King Tut's, and it was a Mediterranean restaurant. Now, I say Mediterranean, but that's a pretty loose term. The guy who owned the restaurant was Lebanese, and his food, I guess, sort of reflected his Lebanese take on Mediterranean. But I have very fond memories of this place. Actually, the funniest thing about it was my freshman year, it wasn't even that. It was an Indian restaurant, and I had Indian food in there. Well, one day after my classes, I was walking up that way, and I was like, didn't that used to be the Indian restaurant? And I noticed it was something else, so I walked in there, and I tried this guy's food. And he had this beef shawarma dish that was about $7.50, $8 that you could get for lunch. And I remember distinctly from the very first time remembering his tzatziki sauce. Now, I say this because I don't like most tzatziki sauces. I like some of them, but his was very different. And I think the main difference I've come to learn over time was he put a lot of tahini in it. But I've never been able to create exactly the same flavors that he used. And the consistency of it was almost like peanut butter, and it was great. I loved just dipping all the shawarma and the rice and everything that came with it in this sauce. I thought it was killer. And it was really fun to come there, because you could sit there, and he had tables that looked out into the main road there, and you could watch all the interesting people go by. And it was really wild. While he was there, they actually completely ripped up the street and closed it down for a few months and then reopened it. And they took out a lane of traffic and put in more parking and some some of these curb things that were supposed to naturally drain during rain. I don't know. And a bicycle lane. So even more interesting characters started going up and down the street. You could just sit there and people watch on your lunch, and interesting people come in and out too, because it was on a very prominent sort of corner. And it was a great little people watching spot for me in between my classes. So then one time I was in there, and he it was so funny. He said, "Oh, our special today, we have lentil soup." And I said, "Oh, my grandmother makes lentil soup." Because she owned a natural health food store, and at a time owned a restaurant with that health food store up in Wisconsin. And he was like, "Oh, is your grandmother Lebanese?" That's how I found out he was Lebanese. I was like, "No, actually, she's German, Dutch, and French." And he's like, "Oh, it's very surprising." Anyway, so he was always, I don't know, this guy, he always had a quick jib, and it just felt like you were part of the neighborhood, you know. I think that's one thing I really want to stress with these restaurants. That the reason why I'm so sad that they're gone is when you ate the food there, it wasn't about the food. I mean, the food was good. I didn't hate any of the food. Was very good. I haven't experienced any food from. I've experienced food that maybe is good from other places, but not always. And this is the connection you felt. You felt very much you were in a captured moment of time. Like, look at me here. I'm talking about all these places from, well, the Santorini place is probably only 5 years ago, but this one, over 10, it's between 7 and 10 years ago, and it's just stuck with me. I'll probably never forget these moments. They were moments in time, I'm a very nostalgic person, in case you haven't noticed from my podcast episodes so far. So, I would eat there and have my lunch there, and I enjoyed it very much. And the one thing that really set this place above and beyond for me, and why I'm so sad it's gone, was one night we tried to get there, and I found out he started closing sooner, and we had gotten there, and he was supposed to close in like 15 minutes. I said, we'll probably just have to go somewhere else, but I just want to stop in and say hey to him before we leave. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm about to close." And I said, "Yeah, we see that. I'm sure you're too busy to give us anything." And he's like, No, I'll make you," because he saw I had my parents and my grandparents with me. He's like, No, I'll make you something. And he brought all the food out to us. He had a little patio area out in the front that was, looked like it might have been part of the sidewalk or the right of way at some point in time, but it was fenced off, and you could see all the people traffic. And he said, "Here, you come sit out here, and we'll bring it all out to you," because usually he didn't even bring the food out, And so he made it for us, and he brought it all out to us, and it was such a fun little evening. It was such a fun little dinner, and we people watched and we talked, and it's almost gonna make me cry now. And I just had such a great time. So in closing this podcast episode, I just want everyone to sort of think about and talk about some of their favorite restaurant experiences. And I'll probably miss Anthony Bourdain, and I think he really exposed a lot of people to interesting things through food. And hopefully we'll all have a little bit of interesting exposures to food in our lifetimes. Thank you all. Check out the Know Your Place podcast on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word, or on Facebook at facebook.com/knowyourplacepodcast, all one word. And we will be coming soon to YouTube and iTunes, and maybe another social media platform near you. Special thanks to my wife, Sarah, and Jay Graff for the riff.